Okay then, brethren, last week we started looking at chapters 17 and 18 of the book of Revelation, which deals with the great harlot, the great whore, and the judgment of the great harlot. And there's two chapters devoted to the judgment of the great harlot. The Apostle John spent two chapters, so that implies it's sort of fairly important. These are major players in end time prophecy. And what we saw last week, and I'll just sort of summarize before we turn to the scriptures, was that you have this great harlot, this great prostitute, sitting on a scarlet colored beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. I think we have a graphic that will just sort of remind you of that picture. So you see the woman, the harlot, she's riding this beast. So what you've got to see there is the harlot and the beast are associated. They're working together, right? And the harlot obviously is, at least initially, guiding, directing, influencing the Scarlet Beast. And then later on, the story changes and the beast turns on and actually destroys the harlot. Now, as we saw last week, an angel comes along and is explaining to the Apostle John what this all pictures. And he says, the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, the 7 heads are 7 mountains, which are also 7 kings or kingdoms. 5 have fallen already in John's day when he was receiving the prophecy. 5 of the 7 had fallen. 1 is, that would be Rome, then alive when John got the prophecy, and 1 yet to come. You know, some people, as we know, see the 7 mountains as actually just 7 hills of a city and surmise from that it's talking of the city of Rome. Not really, not at all, I'm afraid. 7 heads, 7 mountains, 7 kingdoms, 5 already fallen in John's day. 1 is, and 1 was yet to come. And you know, people have tried different angles to explain who these mountains and kingdoms might be. One that to me fits the best would be that the beast is empowered by the dragon Satan and are the empires which have tried over thousands of years to destroy God's people. Ancient Israel down through the Jews and so on. That would start potentially with Egypt. The nation Israel develops in Egypt, becomes enslaved. The pharaohs want to kill off all the male Israelite babies by throwing them in the Nile. So that would be the first attempt to sort of basically impoverish, enslave, and destroy God's people. Then you'd have, say, Assyria, which took ancient Israel captive, the 10 tribes. Then you could have Babylon. These come one after another. Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, not this guy, but the original Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. Then you've got the Persians come after that, the days of Esther and Haman and so on. Then you get the Greeks, Antiochus Epiphanes, the days of the Maccabees. Then you get down to the 1 is in John's day, Rome. 1 is yet to come. And we said last week, potentially that could relate to the Islamic Empire, the Islamic Caliphate, particularly the last one, the Ottoman Empire, one of the world's longest lived empires, spread over Europe, the entire Middle East, all North Africa for 600 years plus. Right? That's a suggestion. But then the angel says to John that 1 of the 7 will be revived or resurrected and will come back as the 8th, but is actually 1 of the 7. And we said last week, which of the 7 might be the one that might come back, the one that might have perhaps a deadly wound being healed. And we suggested again, that's the one we're more interested in because the rest are historic. They were long ago. But the one yet to come, the 8th, who's of the 7, that's the one that fights against Jesus Christ at his return. That's the one we're interested in. And I said at the time, potentially that's going to be the resurrected Ottoman Empire. Time, of course, will tell. Then the 10 horns that were on the beast, the angel says, are 10 kings, 10 kingdoms, 10 nations, who will receive power at the end, and they will fight against Jesus Christ at his coming. So therefore, the 10 horns are clearly end time. In fact, the end of the end time. So that's where we sort of got to last week in terms of the overall picture. And the question we're trying to identify is, well, who is the harlot? If she's going to be judged, who is she? And what does she do? So let's open our Bibles at Revelation 17. And let's read verses 1 and 15. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters." So fine, the judgment is going to be destruction on this great harlot. And here's a clue: sits on many waters. What does that mean? What does many waters mean? Well, thankfully, we find out. We turn to verse 15. It says, "Then the angel said to me, the waters," well, pretty handy, actually tells us, haven't got to speculate and guess, "the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues," languages. So this great harlot appears to have international power and influence because she sits on, that's to sit on like on a horse. You know, the reins, you guide the horse, left a bit, right a bit, on a bit, pause for a bit, right? So here the harlot appears to have governing influence over different languages and different nations, international power and influence, right? Okay, let's drop back to verse 3. "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and there I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast full of the names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns." So the great harlot is located in the wilderness. Now you might say, well, the wilderness might be perhaps suggestive of something else. It's like a symbol. Not really, because the waters are a symbol, but the angel says what they are. They're peoples, nations, tribes, and tongues. The mountains are a symbol, but the angel says what they are. The mountains are kingdoms. With the wilderness, there's no explanation. It's not said to mean anything. So the wilderness means just what it says. The angel carries John away in the spirit into the wilderness, and there he sees the great harlot in the wilderness. And wilderness, like we said last week, the Greek is eremos, which means a desert. So the angel carries John into the desert, and in the desert, John sees the great harlot. Look at verse 18, same chapter. "And the woman whom you saw is that great city, which reigns over the kings of the earth." So again, it's a harlot. It's this woman who sits on many waters, tribes, tongues, languages, nations, who reigns over the kings or kingdoms of the earth. International power, but here referred to as a great city located in the desert. So it looks like we've got a few clues here to try and help us to fathom out who is this great harlot. It's a great city. You know, oh, I know what that is. That's Rome. Vatican, papacy, Rome. For sure, yeah. International power and influence. Rome, not particularly. It's a lovely city to visit as a tourist, and there's some great wines there, lovely restaurants, and great, historic bits and pieces, but it's not particularly influential, and certainly the Roman Catholic Church isn't particularly influential. There are influential Catholics. John F. Kennedy, was a Catholic, I think in name only, and you've got, of course, today Mr. Joseph Biden, Ms. Nancy Pelosi, who are Catholics but in name only. So you might get 2 or 3 influential Catholics, but the Catholic Church itself has got hardly any influence, right? Not international influence the way that's being portrayed here. So great city. I'm going to say it's not Rome. International power and influence, and it's located in the desert. Rome, even if you wanted to pretend it was influential today, is not in a desert. And New York, people say, oh, great harlot, New York, great influence and power worldwide. Yes, New York does have great influence and power worldwide, at least financially, but it's not in a desert, so it doesn't count, right? And what we suggested last week was Mecca, the city of Mecca, the great city of Mecca in Arabia, Saudi Arabia as we call it today, is a strong contender. I think we have a graphic, which you would have seen last week, just showing you some pictures of Mecca. You have to look at the pictures because you can't go there. Mecca is a holy city, the holiest city in Islam, and only Muslims are permitted there. So if you go there at the moment, as a Church of God member or a Baptist or wherever you might be, and you get your head chopped off. You can see there the hills in the background. I think the bottom right picture is quite a good one. You've got Mecca there, and in the far distance you can see hills and desert landscapes. The bottom left picture just shows you the yellowy brown is just desert, right? So Mecca is a great city which sits in the deserts of Arabia, right? And Mecca, as we said last week, is the holiest city in Islam. 1.8 billion people, a quarter of the earth's population, honor Mecca as the holiest place on earth. All Muslims pray to Mecca, supposed to. Not all Muslims, of course, are active and devout any more than all Catholics or Protestants are, but at least in theory, and certainly lots of them do pray 5 times a day towards Mecca. They even have little apps on your smartphone that tell you the direction of where Mecca is, so you can point in the right direction when you pray. All Muslims, if they're healthy enough, are required to make a pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in their lifetimes. So in a typical year, not COVID year like this year, but in a typical year, you get 2 to 3 million Muslims visiting Mecca, as they are required to do. So one of the rules of being a Muslim, you must visit Mecca. So it's a very, very holy city, very special city. And Mecca is almost synonymous with Islam because Muhammad was born in Mecca. That's where Islam began. All Muslims look to Mecca. So Mecca and Islam, they're almost interchangeable, right? And in fact, when you're thinking of Islam, it's worth commenting that we shouldn't just see Islam as a religion. Obviously it is. You worship Allah and you read the Quran if you're able to, the writings, the nonsensical writings of Muhammad. But there is something called a political Islam you'll see mentioned more and more. The religious part, you can understand that, try and convert people to become Muslims. The political part is where Islam and powerful Islamic nations endeavor to actually get involved in the politics of different countries and change that country so it starts to reflect Islamic values, right? So political Islam is perceived by some people who are just waking up to this as a very real danger. Islam involving itself in the politics of your country to change your values as well as your culture. For example, in this past week, in Austria, the Chancellor, Mr. Sebastian Kurz, has just announced, I think I've got the story right here, that the Austrian government is going to vote on creating a crime called political Islam in Austria, because he sees the danger of Islam and its inroads into society, like Mr. Macron does in France these days. So Mr. Sebastian Kurz is going to create, I believe, a crime of being guilty of political Islam. They're trying hard to sort of not go after the religion, because that's frowned upon these days. It's, after all, as we all know, Islam is a religion of peace. Of course it's not. So you try to pretend that part you're going to leave alone, but political Islam, when Islamists and Islamic jihadists seek to get into the government and change a country, that's what they want to now sort of try and stand against. So when you think of Islam, don't just think of the religious part. It's wider than that. Now, some people think the great harlot here in the Bible is the Roman Catholic Church, because they say, well, a harlot pictures a church. We know, God's church is a chaste virgin. So a harlot is a sort of unchaste woman, must be a church, and the obvious candidate is the Roman Catholic Church. Of course, this has been popular for about 400, 500 years. The reformers, Martin Luther, James Calvin, Zwingli, sundry others from those days, they were quite hostile to the Catholic Church for obvious reasons, and so they identified it as, demonic, satanic, evil. And many people since that time have said, yeah, the great harlot must be the Roman Catholic Church. But actually, scripturally, you don't have to identify a great harlot as a church, or even for that matter, a religion, because the Bible itself uses the term harlot of many cities, even great cities. In the desert, for example. Let's turn to Nahum, chapter 3. Nahum, chapter 3. You'll find that on page. I've got page number here.
It's a new Bible. That's
oh yeah, page 1240. It's a newish Bible I'm using today, my Skylar. It's lovely font, lovely print. The margins are useless. You can't write much in them. Unless you write very, very small, as one person who's listening does. But I don't write small. I write in manly fashion, big letters. Anyway, so might be a fraction slower turning around in this Bible. But we're going to read verses 1 to 7 of Nahum, if you've found it by now. It's just before Habakkuk, doesn't help much, and shortly after Micah. So, woe to the bloody city. So we're talking about a city. It's a prophecy of the destruction of a city. And the city happens to be Nineveh. We'll see that in a moment. Or you can see it in, I think, chapter 1, verse 1. It's talking about Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. The place that Jonah went to, Nineveh. You better repent, otherwise you'll be destroyed in 40 days' time. That's the place, Nineveh. Woe to the bloody city. It is all full of lies and robbery. Its victim, its prey, never departs. The noise of a whip, the noise of rattling wheels, of galloping horses, of clattering chariots, horsemen charged with bright sword and glittering spear. There is a multitude of slain, a great number of bodies, countless corpses. They stumble over the corpses. Nineveh, prophetically, was a nation that, the nation of Assyria, but Nineveh, very often you get the city sort of identifying the region or even the country. So a bit like you sometimes talk about, Washington says this or London said that. It means that the government or even the nation. So here, Nineveh is the city, the capital city, where the headquarters, where the decisions are made and all the rest of it. But it's a bloodthirsty nation, Assyria. Bodies everywhere. And their chariots just roll along and bump over the bodies as they go off killing and shedding blood. Verse 4, because of the multitude of harlotries of the seductive harlot, the mistress of sorceries, who sells nations through her harlotries and families through her sorceries. So Nineveh is referred to as a seductive harlot, the mistress of sorceries, magic, occult, able to deceive nations, right? Behold, I'm against you, says the Lord of hosts. I will lift your skirts over your face and show the nations your nakedness and the kingdoms your shame. So she's a woman. And God says he'll lift her skirts up, reveal her naked body to those who observe, because she is a seductive harlot. She's a mistress. That's Nineveh, the city, not a church, right? I will cast abominable filth upon you, make you vile, make you a spectacle, It shall come to pass that all who look upon you will flee from you or shrink back from you. You're so horrific. And say, Nineveh is laid waste. Who will bemoan her? So there's Nineveh, as a city, but described as a seductive harlot, a mistress of sorceries, right? With a multitude. So actually a great harlot, and it'd be quite easy to see this as a prophetic reference to the ultimate great harlot, right? But it's a city. It's not church, not directly. And then we're not going to turn there because I keep running out of time. But in Isaiah 23, if you read Isaiah 23, you'll see that the city of Tyre, Tyre, that's how we spell Tyre anyway in this country. I know other countries across to the west often use Tire, which is ridiculous.
Because I can't spell.
Because you can't spell. I mean, English started over here. We all know the King James Version Bible was good enough for Christ and the apostles, and so on. So Tyre, the city, Tyre, is referred to in Isaiah 23 as a harlot. And again, interestingly, Tyre wasn't just a city, but a city that had associations with many countries around the world, many other cities. It traded, it negotiated, it bought and sold goods and slaves. So a city which has tentacles almost everywhere, right? Tyre was such a city. And then again, we're not turning there, but in Ezekiel 23, you'll actually find two of God's cities referred to as harlots, because you get the northern 10 tribes of Israel up in the north, and of course Judah in the south. The north were headquartered in Samaria. That was the big city of Israel, Samaria, who's referred to as Oholah, O-H-O-L-A-H, Oholah, who is referred to as a harlot, a prostitute. That's God's city of Samaria. Samaria representing, of course, Israel as a whole. And then Jerusalem in the south, a city, is referred to as Oholibah, right? In Ezekiel 23, Oholibah, Jerusalem representing, of course, Judea and the Jewish nation. Oholibah is a prostitute or a harlot. So if you're looking at Scripture, we don't need to sort of look just for a church. Maybe it would be a church, the great harlot, but certainly cities are referred to as harlots, especially if they reach out and educate and deal and negotiate and influence other countries. Let's go back to Revelation 17 and just move on, having identified that great city in the desert. And I'm obviously my friend Nebuchadnezzar, I'm suggesting Mecca. I think a lot of points come out that make Mecca look a very promising, a very plausible explanation, but obviously time ultimately will tell. But here in verse 5 of Revelation 17, it says, on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, or possibly Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Now, traditionally, my view, having come through the Worldwide Church of God, and even before that, the Radio Church of God, was that it must be the Catholic Church, because it says mother of harlots. And what happened was in the 1500s-ish, the Catholic Church was so evil and corrupt and depraved that lots of other churches broke off from her. And so the Catholic Church is the mother, and the other Protestant churches in the days of Luther and the Presbyterians and all the rest of them became the harlot children of Mother Church, the Catholic Church. Well, made sort of sense, I've got to say, but it doesn't fit nearly anything else. And of course the term mother of harlots or mother of abominations, I think we've understood differently the last maybe 20, 30 years, because Saddam Hussein referred in the days of the Iraq War that if the Americans sought to invade and attack, it would become the mother of all battles. Not the original battle, but the biggest and the worst. The mother of all battles. And the mother of all harlots is the biggest harlot, the worst harlot, the biggest abomination, the worst abomination, the mother of harlots. In fact, this week in the Daily Telegraph, one of Britain's slightly better papers. It's what I subscribe to on my tablet. It's not quite as bad as the Mirror or the Sun or the Star, heaven help us. But the Telegraph had an article about declining birth rates in Western Europe in particular, and it says that's a problem because as families have smaller and smaller, fewer and fewer children, then if you get 25 years into the future, suddenly you end up with a country hasn't got enough people, short of immigration, of course, having enough people to actually fund itself and run the country. So a diminishing sort of return if you don't have families with at least 2.4 children. And anyway, the article was entitled, "Why Our Falling Birth Rate Will Bring the Mother of All Problems Later On." So declining population is going to be the mother of all problems. So that term, I think we can understand, is not just to be taken as a church with little spin-off churches, right? And of course, if you come through the worldwide Church of God as I did, you would be probably quite, you'd be looking at books like The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop as being extremely useful in explaining, Mystery Babylon, because Mr. Hislop, Reverend Hislop, as he was in the Church of Scotland, tried to demonstrate that the Roman Catholic Church was a modern equivalent of ancient Babylon. So you had Babylon the Great way back, and Nimrod and Osiris and Tammuz and all that lot. And he tried to suggest that the Catholic Church was just a sort of duplicate. So the two Babylons, ancient Babylon, and he would say Mystery Babylon is, of course, the Catholic Church. I don't know how well-meaning he was, but most historians say that it's a load of nonsense. Hardly anything that Mr. Hislop said in his book can be corroborated. It's largely just made up. So I wouldn't, if I was you and you still feel the two Babylons or the two baby lions, as some used to refer to it, is still relevant to explain the Catholic Church. There's not, well, actually, there's really hardly any historic support at all for it. So I'd probably skip that if I was you. Revelation 17 and verse 6. This great harlot, the mother of all harlots, the biggest and worst harlot, it says, is drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. So an organization, a great city, which kills saints. Well, certainly Islam fits in quite nicely there. And of course, Islam corresponds to Mecca, the heart of Islam, the birthplace of Islam, where all Muslims get their moral support from Mecca, because there was a time when the Middle East was largely Christian, at least Christian in name. People had Bibles, and they referred to God in heaven, and they referred to Jesus, the Son of God, who was crucified on a cross and died, buried, and rose again. And so it was sort of Christian in many respects, right? We would say wrong in a lot of places, fair comment, but it was largely perceived by the world as a Christian part of the world, the Middle East, Jerusalem, Syria, Damascus, all the way down to Egypt and across North Africa. Not any longer. The Muslims killed them all. Well, give them a choice. You can either die or you can convert to being a Muslim. What do you fancy? They just poise this sword by your neck. Think, let me think about that for a few minutes. And of course, a lot of people decided, tell you what, I'll go along with being a Muslim because, I just prefer to be a live coward than a dead hero. But many people, of course, did say, no, I believe in Jesus Christ. He is my Savior. He died for me. If I've got to die for him, so be it. So Islam has a track record of killing people in very large numbers. But eventually, the beast turns on the harlot. Look at verses 16 through 18. And the 10 horns which fight against Jesus Christ, so they're at the very end, which you saw in the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Great city in the desert, international influence, and these 10 nations, these 10 kings will turn on her and destroy her at the very, very end. Okay, let's move on to chapter 18 then. And we've almost caught up with last week, so we're speeding along nicely here. Chapter 18, and let's read verses, I guess, 1 through 10 to start with. That definitely brings us up to last week. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. So a really outstanding angel. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. We'll see that sentence in a few minutes elsewhere in Scripture. And has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison of every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated birds. Like I said last week, foul spirit, unclean bird. It's the same Greek word there. It means unclean. And it's just interesting, to me at least, that here at the very, very end, as the great harlot is about to be judged, that an angel from heaven refers to unclean birds. Right? And I guess he could have referred to an unclean fish, an unclean animal if he'd felt like it, but unclean birds. So how come, a lot of these Christian churches say that, Jesus purified all foods, and even sent a vision to Peter, just pre-Cornelius, to show Peter you can eat anything. Peter says, I've never touched anything common or unclean. I'm not going to do it now. And Peter thought, I wonder what that vision means. And these churches say, well, pretty obvious. All birds, all creatures are clean. Well, this angel doesn't know that. He's talking of every unclean bird, which would be like, vultures and crows and things like that. For all nations, verse 3, have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, because she's a harlot. The kings of the earth, international influence, have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. So this is a very wealthy, great city who seems to be involved with commerce on an international level, resulting in many, many people becoming wealthy. Because Islam isn't just a religious sort of teaching, it's also political and financial. And there's money everywhere. The Middle East countries, the Arab countries in particular, the Islamic nations, they export a bunch of money. I wonder what they get for it. What do you reckon they get for it? There's several studies at the moment, or investigations, I should say, in the US of A. Might be in the UK as well, but they're not well reported on if they're taking place. But in America, the US of A, it's become evident that the Islamic countries like Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE, and others are sending billions of dollars to the USA. An awful lot of that is going to the universities in the States, Harvard, Yale. What are they getting for that? Well, of course, in some places they're setting up a Department of Islamic Studies at the university and building multi-million-pound blocks, and the students being supplied, and lots of money year after year. I think the last number I saw was something like $2 to $3 billion had been received by US universities and not registered with the US government. What are you getting for that money? I mean, are the Arab countries really that keen on American education? What about the Clinton Foundation? Ahab and Jezebel, as they were once called, right? They've set up their charity, the Clinton Foundation, named after, themselves, of course, being humble and meek. And it turns out that at least $100 million has been supplied by Islamic countries to the Clinton Foundation. Why? Well, Why would Islamic countries want to give $100 million to an American charity? Can't they find a charity in Egypt or charity in Turkey, charity in Syria? And Saudi Arabia alone gave $35 million to the Clinton Foundation. What do you get for that? Well, I'll tell you what you get for that. You get favors. You get influence in other countries and their politics and even their military. So you can use your money, if you're Saudi Arabia, represented by Mecca, you can use your money in Greece, lots of Poles. And that's what it's referring to here. The kings of the earth, CEOs, big companies, countries, a lot of money has come their way. And all you got to do is just accept a few little tweaks to your local laws. Just give us a bit of favor here and there. Who knows how much? And it almost certainly happens in this country. I've seen a reference to, I think it was Oxford University, receiving tens of millions of dollars from Arab countries. Why? Of course, also get money from China. It's not just the Arab countries. A lot of countries are open to a lot of, it looks like people have got noses in troughs. They're making money, and Islam's found that to be quite a useful way of promoting and presenting its values worldwide. Anyway, moving on. It talks about the wrath of her fornication, a strange word. There in verse 3, nations are drunk on the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The word translated wrath there really has more the meaning of a sort of powerful emotion. Obviously, wrath and anger is a powerful emotion, but it's just talking about her fornication. The wine is very potent. And in fact, a lot of translations nowadays use the term passion. The passion of her sexual immorality. Passion that drives, motivates, is powerful, important. It's not anger or wrath in that sense. Verse 4, I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, lest you receive of her plagues. For her sins have reached to heaven. God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her just as she rendered to you, and repay her double, according to her works. In the cup which she has mixed, mix double for her. She's going to get pounded, really. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I sit as queen, and am no widow. I will not see sorrow. We'll find another prophet in the Old Testament saying just those words. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she'll be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judges her, and he judges her through the 10 kings by the looks of it. It's God who sets it up, but the 10 kings do the burning by the looks of it. The kings of the earth, international again, who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her, will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, and saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. So it's destructive, it's sudden, it's dramatic. It says one day in verse 8, it says 1 hour in several other places, but in a matter of moments, this great city, referred to here as Babylon, is destroyed. And it talks of fire and burning and smoke, right? Well, it's not the original Babylon, the one in present-day Iraq, because there's nothing there, but it's an archaeological site. There's some ruins there. This, of course, is Mystery Babylon. Told us that. Previous chapter. This is Mystery Babylon, which I'm suggesting is Mecca, the home of Islam, based in the deserts of Arabia. And we call it Saudi Arabia today, but historically it's Arabia. It's called Saudi Arabia only since 1932, named after the royal family, the House of Saud, the Saudis. But it's Arabia is what it's called in terms of its geography. Mecca is in Arabia. And I think we can find a few hints elsewhere, if we do a little bit of detective work, as to where Babylon is in the end time. I'm suggesting Mecca, right? But is there any other supporting evidence anywhere in the Bible that might place end-time Babylon in Arabia. Let's have a look. Let's turn to Isaiah 13. Isaiah chapter 13. I'm going to read verses, a few, starting verses 1 through 3. The burden against Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw. Burden being a heavy weight, a heavy prophecy. Lift up a banner on the high mountain, raise your voice to them, wave your hand that they may enter the gates of the nobles. God says, I have commanded my sanctified ones. I've also called my mighty ones for my anger, those who rejoice in my exaltation. So God says here he's called his mighty ones, his sanctified ones. Angels, they're mighty, they're sanctified or holy. Could it even be resurrected saints? Right? Doesn't matter too much, but it's God talking about his arrival to sort things out, right? Verses 6 through 10. Wail. Why? For the day of the Lord is at hand. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore all hands will be limp, every man's heart will melt, and they will be afraid. Pangs and sorrows will take hold of them. They will be in pain as a woman in childbirth. They will be amazed at one another. Their faces will be like flames. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, with both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he will destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. Well, that's great. Verses 6 through 10 tell us when this is. It's the day of the Lord, or it's just before the day of the Lord, before the destruction from God comes as the trumpet plagues are blown. And it's just before or at the time when the constellations and the sun and the moon go dark. Those are the heavenly signs, the celestial signs of the sixth seal of Revelation 6. So that tells us when this prophecy is being fulfilled, right just immediately before the first trumpet. It's the heavenly signs. It's just as the day of the Lord is approaching, right? That's the timing. Verses 19 to 21. And Babylon, that's what we're talking about, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. The original Babylon already looks like that, right? It's been a ruin for the last 2,500 years, 3,000 years, right? So we're talking here about this beautiful, glorious city of Babylon is going to end up like Sodom and Gomorrah, which of course were burned with fire. It will never be inhabited, nor will it be settled from generation to generation, nor will the Arabian pitch tents there, nor will the shepherds make their sheepfolds there, but wild beasts of the desert will lie there, and their houses will be full of owls. Ostriches will dwell there, and wild goats will caper there. So we're talking of the destruction of Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, right? Well, that's at the end time, just as the day of the Lord is about to approach. Babylon is going to be destroyed. Well, that's fine, that's a reminder of what lies ahead, but what about where this Babylon is? Well, look at verse 20. It says that afterwards it will never be inhabited once it's been destroyed, nor will the Arabian pitch tents there. That's curious. If you were talking of ancient Babylon, there aren't any Arabians there, really. I mean, the odd tourists, I suppose, in ancient Babylon, but Arabians wouldn't pitch their tents in ancient Babylon. And if we're looking at the end time, Arabians aren't going to be pitching their tents in Rome or New York, are they? But there's obviously some significance that says, do you know what? The Arabians won't pitch their tents there. Well, they don't pitch their tents in Milton Keynes, where I am. They don't pitch their tents in Peoria or Duluth, right? The Arabians pitch their tents in Arabia, but it says there they won't. So in other words, it's fingering Arabia as the place where Arabians will no longer pitch their tents. Now, you could take the reference pitch tents as meaning to dwell. You know, Abraham dwelt in tents, and Isaac dwelt in tents, Jacob dwelt in tents. So Arabians, maybe it means pitch tents, just means that Arabians won't dwell there any longer. Well, that's only a remarkable comment if it refers to Arabia. To say that in Arabia, Arabians won't dwell is, wow, surprising comment. It must be on about Arabia, right? But actually, I think that's generally true. It's a point worthy of comment in prophecy because you would expect Arabians to dwell in Arabia, but it says they won't because the prophecy is about Arabia. And when it's been destroyed, there won't be any more Arabians dwelling in Arabia. That's what it's saying. But yesterday, whilst doing a bit further research, it did strike me that, hang on, Arabians pitch their tents there. Even today, there is still a situation that comes up every year where Arabians, and others for that matter, pitch tents at Mecca. Because we've mentioned the Hajj, right? The Hajj is the pilgrimage that all Muslims must make if they're healthy, at least once in their lives. They must go towards Mecca and they must go around the Kaaba and worship. They wouldn't say that, of course, the Black Stone, all right? Well, Mecca is a decent-sized city. It's got about 2 million inhabitants, quite decent size. But at the Hajj, they get pilgrims numbering up to 3 million arriving. So from 2 million most of the year, and over the sort of 5-6 day of the Hajj, it becomes like 5 million. They get 2.5 to 3 million visitors. There aren't enough hotels in Mecca to accommodate that. So what they've done is they've built a tent city. They actually pitch tents, about 100,000 of them. I mean, they're okay. They're air conditioned, which most temperatures in the desert you need. So it's about 100,000 tents pitched, I think permanently there, in a little, I'm going to say a little, but a town nearby, about 5 or 6 miles away, called Mina, M-I-N-A. And I think we have a graphic we can sort of show you here. So this is a graphic of Mina, the city of tents, which is within 4 or 5 miles of Mecca. I think you can see there, perhaps the top right picture, you can probably see there lots and lots of tents stretching into the distance, and of course the mountains and desert behind, right? So I'll give you a little bit of a clue about the city of tents. So I'm just wondering whether when it says here, no, the Arabian pitched tents there, well, maybe that's it. Once Mecca is destroyed, there will be no Arabians either dwelling in Arabia, and certainly nobody pitching any tents near Mecca, because it will be like Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So I think Isaiah 13 to be still, pointing towards a Babylon in end times, pretty close to Mecca. Look at Isaiah 21. Isaiah 21. Starting with verse 1. The burden against the wilderness of the sea. The burden, the heavyweight prophecy against the wilderness of the sea. Now, if you're using a King James version, it'll say the burden of the desert of the sea. And NIV says the desert by the sea, because the term wilderness can mean wilderness, of course, but also it can mean desert. So here's the burden about the desert of the sea, or the desert by the sea. And in fact, the New Living Translation says, this message came to me concerning Babylon, the desert by the sea, because Arabia is actually largely desert. And Arabia is desert, strange enough, surrounded by sea. It's the desert by the sea. It's the desert of the sea. I think we've got another graphic we can probably put up for you here. Sort of I guess like an aerial view showing you Arabia, which we call Saudi Arabia. And on the sort of the west side, you've got the Red Sea. And on the east side, you've got the sort of Persian Gulf. And down at the bottom part, you've got the Gulf of Aden, the Arabian Sea. And in fact, the Arabs often refer to Arabia as the island of the Arabs. Actually, of course, it's not quite an island. But there we go. It's the island of the sea. So we're looking at, back to Isaiah 21, the burden against Babylon, the desert of the sea, right? Verse 6, for thus has the Lord said to me, go set a watchman, let him declare what it is that he sees. Verses 8 through 9, he cried, a lion, my Lord, or he cried as a lion, my Lord, I stand continually on the watchtower in the daytime. I have sat at my post every night, and look, here comes a chariot of men with a pair of horsemen. And he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, and all the carved images of her gods he has broken to the ground. So the watchman cries out, Babylon is fallen, which of course is quoted in Revelation 18 that we saw earlier, right? This is where it comes from. So this is a prophecy about Babylon. Prophecy about Babylon is fallen, which is clearly end time. Verse 11, the burden against Duma. He calls to me out of Seir, watchman, what of the night? Watchman, what of the night? Meaning, watchman, tell me what's happened. Update me on the calamities. What's going on? But this burden is against Duma, or can be translated Edom. Edom is a shortened version of Duma or Idumea. But Duma or Edom actually stretches into Western Arabia. If you look at it on a map, right, you've got Arabia quite big at the top left-hand side. You've got Edom, which actually spreads into Western Arabia. So that's also a reference against Arabia, right? Verse 13, the burden against Arabia. So Duma is part of Arabia. Verse 13 says the burden against Arabia. Let me just move on a bit more quickly. Drop down to verse 14. O inhabitants of the land of Tema, bring water to him who is thirsty. Tema is actually a city in Arabia. Verse 16, for thus the Lord has said to me, within a year, according to the year of a hard man, all the glory of Kedar will fail. And the remainder of the number of archers, the mighty men of the people of Kedar, will be diminished. For the Lord of Israel has spoken it. Kedar is a term generally used to refer to Arabia. Check that out. Any commentary? So what we've got is the burden against Babylon, the desert of the sea. All the geographic references in this chapter are all in Arabia, right? So Babylon is fallen, it says. Babylon is fallen, but everywhere it tells you, Idumea, Arabia, Tema, Kedar, it's all Arabia. So I reckon Mecca in Arabia remains an extremely plausible fit for Babylon at the end times. The Babylon that is fallen is fallen. Certainly hard to see a connection between Rome or Germany or France or Austria. I can't really see that, right? Let's go back to Revelation 18. Verses 7 and 8. We read this earlier. It says, verse 7 and 8, in the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, almost obscenely, with the amount of wealth that's there, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, this harlot does, I sit as queen, and am no widow. I'll not see sorrow. But therefore, says God, her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she'll be burned with fire like Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, strangely enough, we find that this is a reference back to another prophecy in Isaiah. So let's turn to Isaiah 47. So she sees herself as a queen who will be never defeated, never suffer loss. Well, that's not what the scripture says, O queen, O great harlot. Isaiah 47, verse 1, Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground without a throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans. You'll no more be called tender and delicate. So here's the daughter of Babylon sitting in the dust, which you don't do if you're important, right? That's a sign of your humiliation. Verses 5 through 9. Sit in silence and go into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no longer be called the Lady of Kingdoms. Or other translations like the New American Standard and the Net, you'll no longer be called the Queen of Kingdoms. The word Lady of Kingdoms is in the New King James Version, can be translated the Queen of Kingdoms. That's what Revelation 18 says. I sit as a queen. No harm can come to me. I've got power across the entire globe with all of my teachings and the money and the finances. Right? Well, sorry. Verse 6, I was angry with my people, says God. I've profaned my inheritance. I've given them into your hand. You showed them no mercy. On the elderly you laid your yoke very heavily. You said, I shall be a lady forever. I'll be a queen forever. So that you did not take these things to heart, nor remember the latter end of them. Therefore, hear this now, you who are given to pleasures, lived in luxury, who dwell securely, who say in your heart, I am, and there is no one else besides me. I shall not sit as a widow, nor shall I know the loss of children. But these two things shall come to you in a moment, in one day. So Revelation 18 says, the loss of children and widowhood. They shall come upon you in their fullness, because of the multitude of your sorceries, for the great abundance of your enchantments. So that's end time Babylon. Thinks herself a queen and will be destroyed in one day. Back to Revelation 18. And I think we're staying here in Revelation 18 and into 19. So Revelation 18, verses 9 through 19. I'll just read through this. I don't think I've got much time to comment, but it's fairly obvious what it says anyway. Verse 9, the kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her. I mean, CEOs worldwide, government leaders worldwide, there's tens of millions of dollars, there's billions of dollars turning up from the Arab countries of the Middle East. A lot of people become very wealthy when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come, sudden destruction. And the people are going to stand off and think, look, the smoke, the flames burning, the heat, roasting your skin. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. I mean, Saudi Arabia doesn't manufacture much of anything apart from terrorism. Everything it's got, cars, buildings, all that stuff, it's imported. It's a consumer country. Tons of money and it buys everything it needs. Merchandise of gold, verse 12, merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of the most precious wood, bronze, iron, marble, cinnamon, incense, fragrant oil, frankincense, cattle and sheep, everything. This country, Saudi Arabia, which is pictured by Mecca, I think, in that sense, it's a huge consumer country.
Gets it from Harrods.
Yeah, they send some of the princesses. There's 15,000 royals in Saudi Arabia. 15,000, the royal family. And you get, jumbo jets would arrive in Heathrow, and two ladies and the two daughters would get out and go and spend £10 million in Harrods department stores, would be closed just for them to go around and buy. And then the jumbo jet goes back laden. I mean, it's almost obscene, some people would say. Carrying on, it says, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and bodies and souls of men. So slavery I would say returns. There's always a certain amount of slavery in Muslim countries. The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you. You shall find them no more at all. The merchants of these things, who became rich by her, will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What is like this great city? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, in which all of its ships on the sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she is made desolate. And I think we have another graphic, just a sort of a artist's impression of what you'll be looking at here is potentially, it says 1 hour. If that's literally 1 hour, then it must be nuclear. Right? Now, Mecca is actually about 50 miles from the coast. The nearest big port city is Jeddah. And if you're going to visit Mecca for the Hajj, you'll go through Jeddah. It's got a big airport there, and that's where the ships with all these goods head towards Jeddah. So I think, Mecca probably pictures the region, Jeddah, Mecca, so on. And the fires are going to burn and people are going to stand, at a safe distance. So it's going to be destroyed like in no time at all. And of course, whilst the merchants and the financiers and the businessmen are in tears at the destruction of Mecca and Saudi Arabia and all the goodies and all the money they got there, of course, in heaven, it's rejoicing. Look at verses 18:20 through to 19:3. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, or saints and apostles and prophets, as one translation says, for God has avenged you on her. So up in heaven, whilst the people, the merchants, are in tears and mourning, in heaven is rejoicing because, yay, goodbye, good riddance. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down, shall not be found any more. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters shall not be heard in you any more. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you any more. The sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you any more. And it carries on. Verse 24. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints and of all who were slain on the earth. A bloody history. 270 million apparently killed by Islam over the centuries, of which a fair number were believers in God and the Bible. Chapter 19, verses 1 through 3. After these things I heard a loud voice of a great multitude in heaven. And we've covered this a few months ago. A great multitude is actually much people. According to the King James Version, it's exact parallel to Revelation 7:9, the great multitude who come out of the Great Tribulation. So these appear to be the saints in heaven who are up there ready for the marriage supper of the Lamb. And part of the delight of being there is you see the fall of Babylon the Great. After these things, verse 1, I heard a loud voice of a great multitude in heaven saying, Alleluia! Salvation and glory and honor and power belong to the Lord our God. For true and righteous are his judgments, because he has judged the great harlot who corrupted the earth with her fornication. He has avenged on her the blood of his servants shed by her. Again they said, Alleluia! Her smoke rises up forever and ever. So I'm almost certain these are the saints who've been caught up at the return of Christ. With the resurrected dead. They're now in heaven, waiting for the marriage supper of the Lamb, and they can see the destruction from the safety of heaven of the great harlot, Mecca, Saudi Arabia, Islam, right? Something to look forward to. So I guess the takeaway for us is that we've been through chapters 17 and 18. Hopefully we can be quite familiar with the narrative, the text, the symbols and what they say, the words, what they describe. So the narrative piece of cake. Interpretation, yeah, well, okay, that's a bit of caution required. But to me, at least, from where I sit and the research I've done the last few months, it does seem to me that the Islamic Empire, Islam itself, the great city of Mecca, is a very good fit for Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 and Daniel 8 and Daniel 9 and Daniel 10 and 11 and 12. It's a good fit to Matthew 6. It's a good fit to Revelation 6 and 13 and 17 and 18 and 19. Right? Now, if you want to go with Europe and the Roman Catholic Church sitting in the seven hills of Rome, well, it's fine. I mean, have a look, form your own opinion. I'm going to go with Islam and Mecca, at least for now, till I find out otherwise. and you can go with Europe and Rome if you want. It's your choice. And of course, time will tell. And with that, we'll conclude today's Bible study.